In the coastal low country of South Carolina, there is a 5-county region known as the 14th Judicial Circuit. For 100 years, this region had a different, unofficial name. Locals simply called it Murdaugh Country. The dynasty was founded in 1920 when Randolph Murdaugh Sr. was elected solicitor, the chief prosecutor for the entire region. The title was passed to his son, Randolph Buster Murdaugh Jr., and then to his son, Randolph Murdaugh III. For 87 consecutive years, 3 generations of Murdaugh men decided who faced justice and who did not. They were the undisputed center of power, weaving their influence into every police department and courthouse. Alongside this public power was immense private wealth. The family's personal law firm, Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Eltsroth, and Detrick, or PMPED, dominated the region, winning massive, multi-million-dollar civil settlements. At the center of this modern empire was Alex Murdaugh, the son of the third solicitor. He was a brash, highly successful attorney, a man who seemed to embody the family's legacy of untouchable power and privilege. But beneath the surface of this kingdom, a foundation of secrets and corruption was beginning to rot. A single, violent night in 2019 would strike the first crack in the dynasty's facade. A crack that would soon splinter, revealing a decade of financial crimes, a hidden opioid addiction, and a string of mysterious deaths. This is the story of that collapse, and the anatomy of how a name that was the law became a symbol of its total failure. The beginning of the end came on February 24, 2019, on the black, moonless waters of Archer's Creek. Alex's youngest son, 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh, was at the helm of the family boat, steering a group of friends home. He was belligerent, underage, and profoundly intoxicated. Despite his friends' pleas, including those of his friend Connor Cook, Paul refused to give up the controls. At 2:20 a.m., the boat slammed at high speed into the concrete pilings of the Archer's Creek Bridge. 6 young people were thrown into the cold water. 5 survived. 19-year-old Mallory Beach was lost. Her body would not be found for 7 days. But the true scandal unfolded in the immediate aftermath. As emergency services arrived, so did Alex Murdaugh. Witnesses at the hospital reported that Alex moved from room to room, speaking to the teen survivors before law enforcement could. Critically, police officers at the scene, who knew the Murdaugh name well, failed to administer a field sobriety test or blood alcohol test to Paul. It was the Murdaugh playbook in action. This time, however, the playbook failed. The community was outraged. Paul was eventually indicted on 3 felony counts, including boating under the influence causing death. More importantly, the Beach family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. This lawsuit sought justice for Mallory, and to get it, they sought access to Alex Murdaugh's finances. It was a slow-burning fuse, threatening to expose a powder keg of financial secrets. That fuse was set to go off on the week of June 7, 2021. The legal and financial fire from the boat crash was closing in, and on June 7, 2021, it was extinguished by a horrific cataclysm. This was not just any day. On that exact morning, Alex Murdaugh was confronted by the chief financial officer of his own law firm. They had discovered it, the first concrete proof that Alex had been stealing millions of dollars from the firm and its clients. A hearing for the boat crash lawsuit, specifically concerning his finances, was also scheduled for later that week. Alex Murdaugh's world was collapsing. That night, at 10:07 p.m., a 911 call came from his phone. His voice was a frantic wail. I need the police and an ambulance immediately. My wife and child have been shot badly." He told the dispatcher he had been visiting his ailing mother, Libby, and his father, Randolph III, and had just returned to find a scene of unimaginable horror. Down by the dog kennels on his sprawling 1,700-acre hunting estate known as Moselle. His 52-year-old wife, Maggie, was dead, shot multiple times with a .300 Blackout R-style rifle. And his 22-year-old son, Paul, the young man at the center of the boat crash lawsuit, was dead beside her, struck by 2 shotgun blasts. The investigation and the media immediately focused on the most obvious theory: a violent, vigilante-style revenge for the death of Mallory Beach. Alex Murdaugh, the patriarch, presented himself as the ultimate victim. But investigators, knowing about the financial confrontation that very morning, were already asking a different, far darker question. Was this an act of revenge, or a desperate, monstrous act of misdirection? In the immediate aftermath of the Moselle murders, a wave of shock and sympathy rolled through the community. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, took charge of the investigation, a necessary step given the Murdaugh family's deep ties to the local sheriff's department. Alex Murdaugh, presenting himself as the shattered patriarch, provided investigators with what appeared to be an ironclad alibi. He stated that on the night of the murders, he had not gone down to the kennels. Instead, he had taken a short nap after dinner and then driven to his parents' home in the nearby town of Almeda. He said he was visiting his father, Randolph Murdaugh III, who was terminally ill and had just returned from the hospital, and his mother, Libby, who was suffering from advanced dementia. He told police he stayed for roughly 20 minutes before heading back to Moselle and discovering the horrific scene. This story was powerful, it was specific, it was emotional, and in the initial hours, his phone's location data and car's telematics seemed to corroborate it. This alibi, combined with the community's knowledge of the boat crash lawsuit, cemented the primary theory. This was a horrific act of vigilante justice. The investigation focused outward, searching for an unknown assailant, someone with a grudge, someone seeking revenge. For weeks, Alex Murdaugh was treated as the chief victim, not the primary suspect. For 3 months, the investigation into the double homicide seemed stalled. The revenge narrative held, but yielded no suspects. Then, on September 4th, 2021, the case took a turn into the truly bizarre. Another 911 call came in. It was Alex Murdaugh. He claimed he had been driving on a rural back road, Old Salkhatchie Road, when his car got a flat tire. He said that while he was changing it, a pickup truck passed him, turned around, and an unknown person shot him in the head. The media erupted. Was this the same killer returning to finish the job? Alex was airlifted to a hospital. But the story, like Alex himself, was bleeding. And it wasn't bleeding credibly. The wound to his head was superficial. Police found no real evidence of a flat tire, and his story was full of inconsistencies. Within days, the entire fabrication collapsed. Alex Murdaugh confessed. There was no shooter. It was a staged, assisted suicide plot. He had provided a gun to a distant cousin and former client, Curtis Eddie Smith, and instructed Smith to shoot him in the back of the head. The motive? A $10 million life insurance policy, payable to his surviving son, Buster. This was the moment the mask shattered. The grieving patriarch was a liar. He was deep in debt, and he was capable of unimaginable desperation. The central question of the investigation changed instantly, from who killed his family to why did Alex Murdaugh want to die? The $10 million suicide plot was the key that unlocked the entire Murdaugh mystery. It led investigators to the one question that would unravel everything. Why would a lawyer from a family synonymous with wealth and power need to die for insurance money? The answer, as SLED and forensic accountants soon discovered, was that the wealth was a complete illusion. Alex Murdaugh was not just in debt, he was in catastrophic financial ruin. He was drowning in a sea of loans, lawsuits, and a crushing, hidden, 2-decade-long opioid addiction that he later claimed cost him up to $50,000 a week. This financial desperation was the real story, and it leads directly back to the day of the murders. On the morning of June 7, 2021, just 12 hours before Maggie and Paul were killed, Alex Murdaugh was confronted at his office. Gene Seckinger, the chief financial officer of the PMPED law firm, had discovered he had stolen an estimated $792,000 in attorney's fees from a single case. She walked into his office and demanded the money. It was the moment his long-running con had finally hit a wall. His partners, the men he had worked with his entire life, now knew. He was about to be exposed, not just as a drug addict, but as a common thief who had been systematically stealing millions for at least a decade. The clock was ticking. The confrontation on June 7th was just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators and forensic accountants peeled back the layers of Alex Murdaugh's finances, they didn't find a man who had made a few mistakes. They found a prolific, systematic predator operating in plain sight for over a decade. His method was both simple and deeply cynical. He would represent clients in personal injury or wrongful death cases, win large multi-million-dollar settlements, and then simply steal the money. He created a bank account using a name that was deceptively similar to a legitimate financial services company called Forge. He would then divert settlement checks totaling millions upon millions of dollars directly into this personal slush fund. He lied to his clients, telling them the money was delayed, or that the settlements were smaller, or that the money was being held in an annuity. His victims were not corporations. They were a deaf man, a quadriplegic, a highway patrolman injured in the line of duty, and the grieving families of the deceased. He didn't just steal their money, he stole their futures, all while maintaining the public facade of a compassionate, fourth-generation small-town lawyer. This was the true nature of the man behind the dynasty. But what could possibly drive a man with a multi-million-dollar salary and generational wealth to commit such brazen, repetitive theft? The answer, according to Murdaugh himself, was a single, all-consuming force: a 20-year addiction to opioids. This wasn't a casual habit. He claimed it was a raging, multi-thousand-dollar-a-day dependency on OxyContin and other painkillers. He would later testify that he was spending up to $50,000 a week, money that was funneled through a network of local check cashers and accomplices, including his distant cousin and alleged drug dealer, Curtis "Eddie" Smith. This addiction was the insatiable, parasitic engine that his entire life was built to feed. The financial crimes, therefore, were not about building wealth. They were about servicing a desperate, bottomless need. A need so massive that it required him to betray his clients, his partners at PMPED, and his own family. This context is crucial. It paints a portrait of a man living a life of pure, high-stakes desperation. Every single day was a performance, a lie, a frantic search for the next influx of cash to keep the entire fragile structure from collapsing. And on June 7, 2021, When his law firm confronted him, he had finally run out of moves. Once Alex Murdaugh was exposed as a financial predator, investigators began to look back. They started to re-examine the other tragedies and premature deaths that had orbited the Murdaugh family. And they quickly landed on the year 2018 and the death of Gloria Satterfield. Gloria had been the Murdaughs' beloved housekeeper and nanny for over 2 decades. She had helped raise Paul and Buster. She was, by all accounts, practically family. In February 2018, Alex Murdaugh reported that she had tripped and fallen down the front steps of the family's Moselle home. She sustained a traumatic brain injury and died in the hospital 3 weeks later, having never regained consciousness. It was presented as a simple, tragic accident, but in the shadow of the 2021 murders, investigators found glaring, terrifying inconsistencies. Gloria's death certificate, signed by the county coroner, bizarrely listed her manner of death as natural. This directly contradicted the trip and fall story. Even more disturbing, no autopsy was ever performed. The coroner, who was a friend of the Murdaugh family, was never notified of an accidental death, which was a clear violation of state law. A beloved housekeeper had died under mysterious circumstances in the home of South Carolina's most powerful legal family, and not a single official procedure was followed correctly. The question was no longer if it was suspicious, but why it had been covered up. The mystery of Gloria Satterfield's death was horrifying, but the financial crime that followed it was, to many, the most depraved act of all. Moments after Gloria's funeral, a funeral Alex Murdaugh himself attended, he approached her 2 sons. He told them he knew they were grieving and that he was going to take care of them. He convinced them to sue him for their mother's wrongful death, claiming his insurance policies would pay out. He even recommended a lawyer for them, his own close friend and college roommate. What the Satterfield sons didn't know was that this was all a setup. Murdaugh and his accomplice lawyer secured a massive insurance settlement, a total of $4.3 million. But Gloria Satterfield's sons never saw a single cent. Alex Murdaugh, using his fraudulent forged bank account, simply stole it all. He stole millions of dollars from the grieving children of a woman who had raised his own sons, a woman who died mysteriously in his own home. This act, more than any other, illustrated the true void at the center of his character. It proved there was no line he would not cross, no one he would not betray, to feed his addictions and fund his fraudulent life. By January 2023, Alex Murdaugh was a disbarred lawyer facing 99 separate financial charges. But the trial that was about to begin was not for stealing money. It was for the murders of his wife and son. The trial was moved to the nearby town of Walterboro, and it became the biggest media event in South Carolina history. The trial of the century captivated the nation. The prosecution, led by Creighton Waters, faced a monumental challenge. They had a powerful motive: the financial storm of theft and exposure that was colliding on the day of the murders. But their case was entirely circumstantial. They had no murder weapon. Both the shotgun that killed Paul and the rifle that killed Maggie were missing. They had no bloody clothes. They had no DNA evidence or fingerprints from Alex Murdaugh at the scene. And they had no confession. All they had was a timeline, a mountain of financial motive, and a defendant who they believed was a pathological liar. The defense, led by Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, was confident. They believed the state had rushed to judgment, ignoring the far more likely revenge for the boat crash theory. They were ready to dismantle the state's case, piece by circumstantial piece. The stage was set for one of the most high-stakes courtroom dramas in modern American history. The prosecution, led by Crichton Waters, built their case not on a murder weapon, but on a motive. They painted a devastating portrait of Alex Murdaugh, not as a grieving father, but as a family annihilator. Their central argument was the perfect storm. They argued that on June 7, 2021, all of Alex's lies were converging to destroy him. He had been confronted by his law firm's CFO for stealing nearly $800,000. A hearing in the Mallory Beach boat crash lawsuit was scheduled for that same week, where his financial records were about to be forcibly exposed. The prosecution argued that Alex Murdaugh, a man who had built his entire identity on power and prestige, was facing imminent public humiliation. He was about to be revealed as a fraud and a thief. In this moment of ultimate desperation, they claimed, he executed a monstrous plan. He murdered his wife and his son to gain sympathy, to delay the inevitable, and to shift the narrative away from his financial crimes and onto a hunt for a mystery vigilante. The prosecution argued that Maggie and Paul were not the targets of a revenge plot. They were the tools of Alex's final, desperate con. The defense's case rested almost entirely on Alex Murdaugh's alibi, his claim that he was never at the dog kennels that night. For 20 months, he had told this lie to everyone, to SLED investigators, to his partners, to his family. Then, the prosecution presented its smoking gun. It was a simple video recovered from Paul Murdaugh's cell phone. It was filmed at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before the estimated time of the murders. Paul was at the kennels taking a video of a dog. And in the background, clearly audible, was the voice of a third person. It was, without question, the voice of Alex Murdaugh. This was the turning point of the trial. The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence. The ironclad alibi was not just cracked, it was shattered. Alex Murdaugh, who had sworn he was at the main house napping before visiting his mother, was proven to be at the murder scene with both victims just moments before they were killed. His entire defense was built on a lie, and the prosecution had just played the receipts for the jury to hear. The case was no longer about whether he was present. It was about why he had lied for 628 days straight. With his alibi destroyed, Alex Murdaugh and his defense team made the single biggest gamble of the trial. He would take the stand. It was a desperate, high-stakes move. Once sworn in, he had no choice. He immediately admitted to lying to investigators. He told the jury, "I did lie to them." But he blamed it on his 20-year opioid addiction, claiming it induced a paranoid distrust of law enforcement. He famously said, "Once I told a lie, I had to keep lying." Over 2 days of grueling cross-examination, prosecutor Crichton Waters forced Murdaugh to admit, one by one, to the dozens of financial crimes he was accused of. He admitted to being a liar, a cheat, and a thief. He was forced to look at graphic photos of his son's body. But on the central question, he never wavered. He repeated over and over, "I did not kill Maggie, and I did not kill Paul." The defense, in their closing, even floated a desperate two-shooter theory, suggesting that the different weapons implied multiple killers. But the damage was done. Alex Murdaugh had confessed to being a masterful liar, and now he was asking the jury to believe this one final story. After 6 weeks of intense testimony from 75 witnesses, the case went to the jury. The defense had argued for days, weaving complex theories of unknown shooters and police conspiracies. The prosecution had argued for hours, focusing on the kennel video, the financial motive, and the mountain of lies. It took the jury less than 3 hours. On March 2, 2023, the verdict was read. Guilty of the murder of Maggie Murdaugh. Guilty of the murder of Paul Murdaugh. Guilty on all counts. The speed of the verdict was a stunning and total repudiation of Alex's testimony. The gamble had failed. The next day, Judge Clifton Newman delivered a blistering sentence, condemning Murdaugh for betraying his family and his profession, sentencing him to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. The reckoning did not end there. Months later, Alex Murdaugh pleaded guilty to 99 separate state and federal financial charges. He admitted, finally, to the decades of theft that had built the financial storm. The legal saga of the murders was over. The verdict sent a shockwave through South Carolina and brought a century-old dynasty to a final, crashing end. The Murdaugh name, once a symbol of absolute power and legal invincibility, was now ruined, a permanent shorthand for corruption, murder, and betrayal. The ancient law firm, PMPED, was forced to rebrand, scrubbing the Murdaugh name from its letterhead in a desperate attempt to survive. The Moselle estate, the 1,700-acre kingdom where the dynasty held court and where its heirs were slaughtered, was sold off at auction, piece by piece. But the reckoning is not truly over. Many questions remain. In the end, the Murdaugh saga was never just a whodunit. The evidence, once revealed, painted a clear, dark, and tragic picture. This story is, instead, a journalistic exploration, an anatomy of corruption. It is a case study in what happens when generational power goes unchecked for 100 years. It is about the culture of silence and impunity that allowed one man's personal demons, his addiction and his greed, to metastasize, rotting an entire institution from the inside out. Alex Murdaugh didn't just fall. He was the product of a system that believed, for decades, that it was above the rules. He stole from the most vulnerable, people who trusted him with their lives. He lied to his partners, his friends, and his family. And when that web of lies was finally torn apart by the boat crash lawsuit, he sacrificed his wife and son to try and spin one last desperate story. The 10-year collapse of the Murdaugh Dynasty is a dark mirror, forcing us to ask how many other systems of power operate in the shadows, just one tragedy away from their own final reckoning. Does the fall of the Murdaugh Dynasty mark a permanent shift in accountability, or was this merely a rare exception where the facade cracked? I'd love to read your perspectives in the comments below. If you find value in this kind of in-depth analysis, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Stratum Logic to support our work. To continue exploring the hidden mechanics of power and justice, click the video appearing on your screen now. Thank you for deep thinking with us.